Hi, and welcome to A Class of Their Own podcast, revealing the human stories behind their name. We will hear honest and intimate reflections from our guests who, despite their circumstances, shape a world that reflects their unique visions of success. Join me, Miriam Magacha, to learn from these inspirational people and take the first step to make your own change. Was there anyone who was helping you navigate these changes? Were you having conversations with anyone? Who's helping you? Where are you going for advice and support?
So I always knew my parents were there for me, but I didn't know how to talk to them.
Right.
And I think that's a huge issue that so many young men have, that even if they know, like, the first bit is admitting there's something wrong. The second bit is knowing how to talk about it. And like, no one tells you how to do that. Like within sport, there's support and there is kind of transition support, but it's all focused around what you're going to do. So the clubs or people will be like, right, well, you need to train or you need to do a degree. And I'm like, that's great. Like now looking at it from the work I do today is like the doing bit's cool, like it's important, but actually it's really way more important to work out who do you want to be after sport. And you can work on that whilst you're still playing.
Yeah.
And that work, the who do I want to be, doesn't matter what you're doing. And if you can look after that piece of yourself, then the doing stuff kind of takes care of itself. So I'd done like, and I would have been quite smug at the time. I'd done the textbook like transition preparation, which like I'd done a degree with Open University. I'd done loads of work experience to work out what I didn't want to do. And I thought, yeah, I'll be fine. And then like I got offered some counselling when I retired. And I remember this guy came to my coffee shop 3 times and it felt so disconnected from what I was experiencing. Like it's actually laughable that and I know that as a therapist or a coach or a counsellor, you don't need to have done what that person's done or been through what that person's been through. But this was a guy who didn't understand anything about sport. And his some advice was, well, at least you got to do what you loved and you should download Headspace. He's like, but don't bother paying for it. You just need to do the free one every day and that will fix everything. And I came away from those 3 sessions angrier than I'd ever felt because I'd actually been brave enough to ask for help, but the help had been really shit.
Yeah.
But as, again, like a 26-year-old lad who had no experience in any of this, how was I supposed to know that that was one mode of help? And there's actually 1,000 other ways and people I could have spoken to. So I guess I did reach out for help. And I'd also had counselling when I played because there was a period at Quins where I was really struggling with depression. But again, it was very sterile, kind of like CBT talking to a blank face. And like, I now know, reflecting back as a 23-year-old kid, I just needed like a hug I needed someone that I could see cared about me. I didn't need a mirror at that point in my life.
Yeah.
But again, like there was no other option. In my head, there wasn't.
And you'd already asked for help. And so you thought the help that you were getting wasn't actually helping you.
Exactly.
And it was working against you. And therefore you carried on doing what you knew was right, which was, I'm just going to concentrate on this coffee shop.
Exactly. And I imagine this will ring true of a lot of people listening. It's like, well, if that help didn't help me, then that must mean I'm fucked.
Yeah.
And I'm wrong because if that's
this person's the expert.
Yeah. And if that's the help that helps loads of other people, why can't it help me? Yeah. And it's like, well, fuck, there's so many other ways you can get help. It's okay that mode doesn't work for you because we're all different.
Yeah. But you have to have enough of an awareness of what is available to know that didn't work and there's something else out there, and having the people around you who either help you with that information or you know what question to ask to feel better about yourself.
Exactly, yeah.
What happens with the coffee shop? So you've relatively quickly signed a lease, opened a coffee shop. What happens?
Like from the off, it went really well and I threw myself into it, like full like 7 days a week, working in the shop, doing everything like the running of the business in the evenings in a really unhealthy way. An investor came and approached me after 6 months saying, would you like to do more shops? I said, of course, because I didn't think about what that meant and what I had hoped that the coffee shop would give me, which would be to feel good about myself and feel confident. I obviously felt exactly the same. And so I thought, well, I must need to be a better entrepreneur and more successful. And when the more success comes, that's when I'm going to feel good about myself. And that's a really common trap that we all get into.
Yeah.
And
when the next milestone happens, when the next thing happens. Yeah.
And it's like, when you get to the place that you thought would give you the feeling you were looking for and it doesn't, you're like, well, I was just obviously looking for the wrong thing. And so rather than actually sort of stopping and looking down and being like, the only place I ever am is where my feet are, like, let's work on who I am today. We're like, I'm just going to go chase the next thing. So yeah, I did that, ended up with 3 coffee shops across 3 cities, wholesale coffee roasters, roasting for ourselves and for like a bunch of other customers. And I hated it because I'd gone from this small, like, community-led shop, which I was in every day. I knew the team like inside out and was really enjoying building something like kind of special at the heart of Worcester, to ended up with like a business across 3 cities with 60 team members. And I had created this beast that, like, I didn't want to be a big business owner, like, but I didn't ever ask myself, what do I want to be?
Yeah, what do I want to do with my time?
And all of a sudden, 6 years later, I've got this thing that I'm like, this isn't what I signed up for.
So what do you do with that?
So it'd be like 3 years ago now, I realized, like, during COVID, how deeply unhappy I was in this like part of my life. And I started to like search for purpose and meaning, which so many of us do. And that became its own kind of chasing this rainbow thing of mine that I was just doing in the background. And I think probably makes sense to like go backwards a few steps. Is in 2018, so 2 years after I retired, like, I had a regular customer called Hugh who'd been coming from the start. And I always say to people that he must have just seen like the steady decline of me over that 2-year period. And like one day he literally like came and put his hand on my shoulder and was like, Sam, shall we go for a coffee? And I did what I always did. I was like, yeah, no, I'm fine. Because I knew what he did, because we'd kind of become friendly. And he's like, no, I think we should go for a coffee. And I went, and the coffee changed my life because we started working together. And he was like the perfect coach for me in that stage of my life. And I feel super blessed that he put his hand on my shoulder, because I would never have gone and asked anyone else for help, I don't think, because I felt like I'd exhausted that avenue.
And what did he say other than put his hand on your shoulder?
It's less what he said. I think what he did is he made me feel like I was normal, and that it could change. And that I wasn't the only person that felt like this.
And what could change?
Me and my life, and how I felt about myself, and how I spent my time.
How did you feel about yourself at the time?
Probably like a worthless piece of shit. And in my head, I'd failed at everything I'd ever tried, which I now know is not true. But that was the story I told myself. And yeah, I believe nowadays, like, we meet the perfect people at the perfect time. And yeah, I mean, to like expand on Hugh and how amazing he's been for me, is we did this initial piece of work in 2018, and within weeks my life had changed and completely turned around. And then kind of come to COVID, I'd moved to Bristol with Emma, who's now my ex-partner and the mother of Fred and Nell. We'd moved to Bristol, and I was back in Worcester, and he saw me, and I must have looked terrible again. And he said, what's going on? And I kind of sat down and started speaking. He's like, Sam, why haven't you called? Like, why haven't you phoned me? And I said, I remember saying, well, I thought we were done. And he's like, what do you mean? I was like, well, we finished our 8 sessions and I thought we were done. And he's like, we're never done. Like, and then he started driving to Bristol every week to see me for a period. And then that was maybe 2.5 years ago. And like, we still see each other monthly. And it's it's those people in your life that just change everything. And I guess my like real wish these days is to one, be that person for others, but also to help others realize that there is help and there is hope, because I think we live in a world where that's just like diminishing on a daily basis.
Yep. And what is it about what you do now that gives you purpose and meaning?
So yeah, when I think about purpose and meaning, I touched on it earlier, like I was searching for this thing, like it was an object, like I would find the job or the thing that would make me feel like I had a purpose. And now when I articulate purpose, I don't think purpose is something you find, I think it's something you feel. And I don't think it matters what you're doing, but you know in your like, literally in your bones, in your soul when you're doing it. And for me, it's those moments in coaching sessions where clients suddenly wake up to the story they've been telling themselves and they're like, fuck. And then their whole life unravels, but in this completely like beautiful way where their life will never be the same again. And it's those moments you're just like, fuck. Like to be a part of that and to be witness to that is epic. And to see like someone realize that what they've been searching for has been inside them the whole time is just like, it's magic.
Yeah, it's a real privilege.
Yeah, it is.
When you hit 50, it's like it's a very weird thing that happens, which is you suddenly realize, wow, I'm dark side of the moon now. I've got fewer years left of me than I've got fewer years ahead of me than I got behind me. You know, your parents start getting really old. You start to notice they're really old. All your mates start dropping dead. And there's this sort of, it sounds morose, but there is a moment when you realise, hold on, this train ride doesn't last forever.
Yeah.
And so I just thought, Christ, you know, I live in London in the 21st century, which is probably about as good as it has ever been in the history of the world. I can choose where I live, what I do, what I eat. I'm very, very fortunate. I've got loads and loads of things that millions and billions of other people around the world don't have, and I was still miserable. And I just suddenly thought, Christ, you know, I'm working in a business, my business, with a whole bunch of people that I don't like very much, doing things I don't really like to do for people who don't really care. And
and that's a moment.
Which is pretty catastrophic.
Yeah.
And then on top of that, I was married, and it was a disaster. It was not a very good marriage. It was effectively over. And so every aspect of my life was just packing in. And I thought, Christ, I'm working so hard for all these other people to try and provide and be the Italian dad. And I was just miserable. So I just said, right, now I'm just going to do things I want to do. And it's the first, and you know, I don't know what your background is, but it's probably the same as mine. Like parents came over and you become, what do your parents do?
Unfortunately, my dad passed away.
Oh, I'm really sorry to hear that. What did he do when he came over?
When he came over, I think he had a paper factory in the UK worked in a
trying to be useful, right?
Trying to be useful.
It's an immigrant thing. Try and be useful. My dad used to say, try and be useful, because at some stage somebody might ask you to leave.
Yeah.
But if you're useful, they won't.
Yeah.
And he had a restaurant. And so I've got this pleaser thing of like trying to look after and nurture and, you know, build and I just thought, you know what, fuck that. I want to do it for me now. I want to do what I want to do. I had an incident when I lived with my mum where I was found hanging on the stairs by my sister, and she came out and went, "Oh, David's dead," to my mum, and my mum went, "What are you talking about?" And they went out there, and I was kind of tied to, I had a school tie tied around my neck. I had no idea what happened. 14, and I was in a coma for about a week. Told I was dead. Well, they were told I was dead. They got me going again. I was in a coma for a bit, last rites and all that kind of jazz. And then managed to come out of it.
And when you say, because this is new information.
Yeah, I try not to give you all the information beforehand. I like to try and keep a little bit of something back.
Great. When you say you don't know what happened, do you remember what led you to that moment?
Nothing at all. Nothing at all. I don't remember anything for about... I remember a couple of things when I came out of hospital and I came back home. There were a couple of things that I remember doing or starting to do, and then they were finished. A couple of art pieces or a model I was making, and they were done. So it was obviously I'd done that, and then, but apparently I spoke to my mum about it this summer actually, because I was always intrigued. It never really bothered me, never ever thought about it. But now as I'm getting older, And especially now that I've found this thing, which I really enjoy, which is trying to dig out from people what it is they really want to be doing.
Yeah.
Because I've gone through quite an interesting journey to get to where I am, and I'm loving every moment of it. But I sort of think I know how easy it is to sort of be 22, 23, 30, 40, and just carry on drifting through the corporate world or whatever it is you do, and sort of start to forget. And I know living in London's fucking difficult and you've got to get money and all of that kind of stuff. But there is something that lives at the heart of everybody, which is this is what I really wish I was doing.
Yeah.
And so I get a huge amount of joy in talking to people like this guy about his business and how it's going. I love that, because it's like if you can find something in people that they love doing, encouraging them to do it is the best feeling ever. And so, like I said, I never really thought about it. The accident, and I called it an accident. I don't know if I tried to kill myself. I don't know what happened. I think I was fucking about, basically, and it was a prank on my sister that went wrong.
Do you remember what you were doing before?
No, nothing. I don't remember anything.
So what's the time period that you just don't remember anything?
From about probably, well, I mean, I was at school at the time. It was a school day. There was nothing kind of miraculous that happened during the day, and then it was like a sort of, I was in a coma for about 4 or 5 days, and then I was in hospital for about 10 days, and that was it. And then I returned home. But they pump you full of morphine so that when you're in or when you're out, when you come back, you don't get a huge shock to the system. You just drift back, and they reduce the amount of morphine in you. So I have no idea. And I've never had any kind of, never had any desire to do a regression or anything like that. I mean, imagine if you sort of did it and you found it was your sister doing it, you'd be horrified. But as I got older, I think it became something that I suddenly thought, shit, man, I could have been. I mean, I managed to respawn at 14.
Yeah.
I've experienced an incredible amount of things, good and bad.
Yeah.
And I would have missed out on all of those things.
Yeah.
And I certainly would have missed out on the era that I'm in now, where I'm just loving every minute of what I do. I don't feel stress. I don't feel anxiety like everybody does in any job that they're doing. I'm lucky that I can come in and go to my studio and do what I want, and then go home and I go to bed and I repeat.
This episode is brought to you by Play for Change. Play for Change brings together leadership coaching, expert facilitation, and builds communities. They help craft real connections, spark learning, and turn play into powerful experiments to enable better relationships with yourself and others around you. To find out more, go to playforchange.co.uk. Links are in the show notes below.
What people don't understand, especially as a freelance, I mean, maybe any freelance, but I can only relate to being an actor or being a stunt performer or whatever, is that the job itself sounds very exciting. And everyone's like, oh my God, you work in film and TV, or you do this and you've been on this show and blah, blah, blah. And you're like, yeah, it's great. But I probably do that for 50 days a year. Right. There's 300 days plus where I'm doing nothing. Like nothing. And it's very easy to kind of just slip into, what am I doing today? What motivates me? What's my purpose for the day if I'm not doing what I'm set out to do or the thing that I love? And years ago, that was kind of work in a restaurant, have a side hustle. And then I worked in street food. That was a side hustle. And now I'm at this point where I'm just like, I can't do it. I can't do these side hustles. When I first graduated, I was like, I'm not having any other job other than acting, and I'm going to make this work. And I made that work for like a year or two. I just picked it up. The work was happening, and I thought, just keep thinking this way and you're good. And then it kind of trailed off, and you're like, okay, I've got to get a job. So you get a job. And now I'm at a point, I'm in my 30s, and I'm like, if it's not what I want to do, I'm not doing it. And something will happen. And again, back to my early 20s, it is happening. Things are happening. Every time it dries up and I start to panic, something comes up. But I don't think people realize the downtime of being a freelance or performer are the hardest days, and are the days that they're the biggest achievements, is to get through those days, not the days when you're enjoying doing what you're doing. But yeah, the highs are definitely performing or directing or creating or playing on the guitar. I'm not a musician, but I just play the guitar at home just because it's like chill time, but it sets off some endorphins, I suppose. So they're definitely the highs, but the lows are definitely more frequent.
So there was a moment where you had done a piece of work, and I had done a piece of work roughly the same time frame, and I just had a complete low because it was a really high energy event that I'd just run, and we met up a week or so later, and you were like, "How was the low?" And I didn't expect it, and you kind of came over and said, yeah, it's the natural course of what happens when you do something that is so impactful. And it was that first wake-up call for me. But what you're saying here is that happens regularly for you.
I can only relate this now, not relate it, because I know that happens for me on everything that I do. If I have a project, I put my whole self into it. Again, I'm not half in. If I'm in, I'm in. So I'll probably give probably too much of myself to a project or to someone else's project or whatever that is, i.e. the Louvre. I give everything, every part of me. So then when it doesn't go the way I want it to, it's a disaster. But even if it goes the way I want it to, it's the best feeling ever. You go, oh my God, I've done what I thought was impossible, I've achieved. And then maybe the second day, you've still got a bit of a buzz and you're like, I'm on top of the world, I've got it. And then the third day or the second, the third, whatever day you get to, you then just go, whew, unless you've got something else to roll straight onto, which isn't always the case. So yeah, the lows are real. And I watched a podcast actually the other day. It had Tyson Fury in, and he's talking about the boxing and saying like, you know, he's out there and he does his thing and wins a fight. It's the best feeling in the world. And the next day he's got to go down to the skip and get back to normal Tyson, because otherwise he's fully suicidal and he has these depressive thoughts. And I don't think I've ever got to those like extremities. I don't think I'm like, oh my God, like the next day is terrible. But I think depression is definitely a thing that is easy to slip into and a lot harder to stay out of. So I think that real high becomes dangerous because then it's contrasted with a real low the next day. And then you have to try and find the balance. And I think that's something, even now within work that I take on, I try to work that balance of going, okay, let's try and set some hours aside. Let's not work your whole weekend. Let's not put every moment of your headspace into this one project like I have done previously, because it will destroy you come the end. You need to still go to the gym every morning. You still need to make sure you're eating. You still need to go for a walk. You still need to have a lunch break. Like, that's the most important one. Have a lunch break, but instead, because if you're working from home or a coffee shop, you're like, well, I'm working. And if you're on something, you're on it. So you just keep going.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think now it's about that balance of going, these are my work hours. Even as a self-employed person, I have to stick to some sort of structure, because without the structure, I'll lose myself in the project. And then at the end of the project, you just fall to bits. And then it takes way too long to rebuild yourself to where you once were. You're kind of just struggling again.
And how do you rebuild?
I think trying to keep normal routine. I think for me, like going to the gym and doing those sort of activities where you can just get out of your head for an hour a day helps. But it's very easy that if you get too busy with work at times and you do let that slip, you slip out of it. And then when you finish that job and the low kicks in, it's then really hard to go back to it because you've already slipped out of it. So then it's a struggle mentally to kind of push through that barrier and go, let's get up and let's go. Even if it's just let's get up and go for a walk. So I think now I kind of put in some non-negotiables, and it's like, I will go to the gym. Either I'm going before I go to work or I'm going in the evening, and that has to become a non-negotiable, because otherwise, if it goes, structure goes.
Having come from the environment and the culture that we come from, talking about something like grief and losing your dad and almost shedding a tear isn't what men were taught to do. How are you so comfortable, or what makes you so comfortable, given the context in which we grew up?
I think it's because I've seen what happens if you don't. I've seen, like as I mentioned earlier, about the people who've either drink away their problems, they pass away young, especially Punjabis. That's a very stereotypical thing. Men don't express their emotions. What do? They drink instead. They die early. Their kids have to deal with that. Then you have the other side of things where you just see the destructive behaviors that happen with people who don't open up. And it's funny because a lot of my writing before my dad passed away was all about this intentionality and how do you balance your emotions and how do you do those things. Whereas what I did when my dad passed away is all my systems were tested and all my systems broke. And what I did is overwork myself instead.
Yeah.
But what I knew very clearly is like, I can't bottle this up, because if I bottle this up, what happens to me is what I've seen happen to other people, and I can't allow that to happen. And I think about this quite a lot too in terms of why I'm able to do it. And part of it comes because I've done so many things in my life, which I think are beyond what I thought I was capable of in some ways. So the karate background, the obstacle course races, I think I've done enough to myself now to prove I'm tough. And what I've had a lot from people when I do open up, especially Asian men, is that a lot of them say, I feel the same way, but I would never have the guts to say that. And to know that other people are dealing with the same things is very helpful to them.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of work, good work being done now, I think, in the Asian community to try and change those behaviors. But it is the interesting challenge of people can say one thing online, but it's the whole thing of how you actually acting with the people around you. So if somebody around you know they're struggling, are you trying to avoid them?
Yeah.
Are you actually supporting them? Are you allowing them to have that space to feel open to talk about it? Or are you posting stories about, oh yeah, I love mental health and men should talk up, but then actually you avoid those people? And it's that kind of making sure it's not performative. So that's why I said, if I'm writing all this stuff about how you should be open, how you should be emotionally mature,
Yeah.
and the first thing I do is bottle up, it's like, well, I'm now a hypocrite.
Yeah.
So there's an element of that, like I need to make sure that what I believe is the same way I'm acting.
You have to walk the walk.
Yeah. And one of the things I did before, I think it was a few months before my dad passed away, I had made a little promise to myself that whenever somebody asked me how I'm doing, I never lie. And then once my dad passed away, I was like, it's a really stupid decision. I wish I just didn't say that, because then what happens, I said so many times that story. And I think it was important to not bottle it up, to allow that to destroy me from the inside. And what I've tried to work out over the last year is how much of that is useful and cathartic to me, and how much is just dredging up painful memories.
Yeah.
And I'm not sure on the balance, but I'm experimenting with it. I'm trying to work out, is me talking about it helping me still? Or is this actually now just reliving the trauma over and over again? And that, I think, hopefully it's come across. But now what I focus on a lot is that self-awareness aspect, where I constantly question why I do the things, why I do them. Why do I do this? Is it because of a running towards something or running away from something?
Yeah.
And that's something I play on quite a lot with myself, is why. And it's even expanding my old behaviors of, why did I do that? Why am I in this way? Why did I send that message for? Why did I word it in that way? That wasn't, like, I should be better than that. Why did I allow that to get to me? And it's just playing with that a lot more, of understanding my actions and do they align with what I say I believe.
How much of what you've just talked about aligns with you and your siblings, for example? Because, and again, I could be completely wrong, but you're one boy with two sisters on either side, so you're the sandwich in between. So is there something around the feminine influence in your life, and your mum now, with you being the only masculine? And that's not to say your sisters don't have masculine traits, just the feminine and the masculine. And does that play any role in how you think about these things and how you come across?
I think it definitely does. And it opens you to other experiences. And the other thing I think is a factor here too is because I went to an all-boys school. So for a lot of my teenage years, most of time I was interacting with boys, and boys in a mentality of at that time, it's like, you've got to be tough, you've got to be hard, whatever. And when I was in university, obviously, then now I had a lot more female friends. And that's probably something which shifted me over time, is that greater female influence of who I talk to. Whereas when I was in my teenage years, overwhelmingly I was talking to other guys, and you have that weird alpha situation in different classrooms and things like that, where you're trying to work out that dominance.
Yeah.
So I definitely think the influence of my sisters, and it was also like I'd say they're way stronger than I am in many ways. And there's a lot. So it's an interesting thing because my dad has passed away, then I'll talk about him quite openly. Whereas my sisters and my mum, I don't talk about as much, but they're also a massive influence on me and the positive impacts they've had. And I mentioned before about all these different things I did when I was a kid. It's because my mum was willing to drive me around and put that sacrifice in.
Yeah.
So there's so many different reasons. Like I talk about the luck of why I'm where I am. And so much of that to do, I was very lucky to be born into the family I was. Not necessarily because we're billionaires or anything like that, but just they actually cared about me. Yeah. And I'm very lucky to have parents who cared about me.
Yeah. Being very privileged to be in a loving household where they gave a shit in the nicest possible way.
Yeah.
So my best friend Dave, as we hashtagged it back then, took his own life. He committed suicide. He would have been around 21. And it was, one of the most defining moments, obviously, in my life that changed my trajectory too. And that's where I guess this drive for breaking social isolation barriers is so pertinent and so important to me. Dave was probably one of the only of our close group of friends who didn't go to university. Not that university meant that it was the right place to be, but ultimately it just meant distance-wise. He was no longer close to us. We all scattered across the UK. He was the only one that was left in Kent, which meant he was fighting his own battles, and none of us really and truly had the time because we're not there. You know, we grew up in a time you just pull up to your best friend's house, knock on the door and hope he's there. Yeah. And unfortunately, in that period, I remember vividly being in the library and my mum called me. She said, "Oh, have you heard about David?" I was like, "No, what's going on?" She's like, "Oh, he's in hospital." I was like, "What? He's in hospital?" And obviously I rushed. I left the library. I went all the way back to Kent from London. I was studying at UCL. I went to Kent to go and see him. And yeah, he didn't make it. He didn't make it. And to lose, your best friend, and when I say best friend, I mean, we did everything together. I mean, he taught me how to ride my first motorbike at 15. Don't tell the police. He taught me how to play the drums. He taught me how to ski. He really was the guy that I did everything with. He was family. He was family to me. But yeah, for him to take his own life, for him to be in that place of darkness, to be in that place where he didn't feel like he could share everything with me, it very much highlighted the reality for a lot of our young people. They need more outlets. They need more safe spaces. They need the ability to articulate what they're going through. And part of that is actually building their resilience to communicate what they're going through. And that's why I'm focusing on creating programs that give them that confidence to do that. Sometimes you can have your best friends in the room with you every single day. It doesn't mean you're talking about what you actually want to talk about. And that's why I feel there is a need to find a balance between the power of a peer group versus the external influences that are positive and mentors and all of the good stuff that genuinely helps young people.
If you enjoyed that conversation, please share A Class of Their Own podcast with your friends and family. Subscribe, follow and like. It really helps us continue to grow. Keep being you through connection, learning and play. You are a class of your own.